name is Kal Penn. I play the character of Gogol Ganguly in The Namesake. He's actually very comfortable with who he is, and he's always been very comfortable with who he is, being this kid from outside of New York City, an American kid of Indian descent. He's bilingual. None of those things, prevent him from sleeping at night, but those are all some of the things that other people kind of force upon him. Like, do you feel you're more Indian or more American? Well, the two aren't mutually exclusive, according to Gogol. So those are things that bother him when other people take issue with his identity. In a lot of ways, I think Gogol is from time to time pretty self-absorbed, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that just definitionally. He gets caught up in a lot along the course of the story, and you see that he's sidetracked a lot. He's got a very close relationship with his family. He always has had that relationship growing up, but when he has his girlfriend Maxine, for example, he lives with her. He's very much a part of her family, and almost without even realizing it, he's ignoring his family in the process.
Don't your parents want you to marry a nice Indian girl?
I don't care what they want. This is what I want.
Gogol's deepest regret with relation to the story is having not spent as much time with his father as he would have liked. He believes that his family confines him from time to time, but I think towards the end of the film he realizes that the contrary is actually true. I think there are similarities between myself and Gogol, but I think the similarities that a lot of people think of are not the ones that are the real similarities. I think people assume a lot that the similarities have more to do with ethnicity or shared history. That's actually not the case, in my opinion. And I think one of the reasons we have that assumption is because stories like this aren't often told in American cinema. So when you see that it's a South Asian family and that you see that I am of a similar background, the immediate assumption is, well, there's got to be a connection there. And certainly there is a connection in terms of growing up and what family life is like. But I think that anytime you have an ethnic story, that doesn't really drive a film. You can't. If ethnicity is the only thing that drives it, then it's not universally appealing to people. So it's got to have all of these other universal elements, and I think those universal elements are the things that I have more in common with Gogol. His career choice. He's very passionate about what he does for a living, and I'm the same way. He always has people telling him that they feel uncomfortable with his identity, whereas he's perfectly comfortable with who he is. I have this weird attachment to this character, and I still haven't figured out exactly why. The analogy that I use sometimes is that reading the book spoke to me the same way that The Catcher in the Rye did when I read that when I was 14. And Holden Caulfield and I couldn't be further apart demographically, but for some reason there's that weird attachment. You never know why when you read a novel, why you feel a certain way about a character, and this is one of those novels. So many of the scenes, whether it's something that's happened to me in my life or something that's completely the opposite, it's weird how when you love a character that much that he takes on a life of his own.
For me, it was it should be an open book in a very truthful sense of how I got inspired by The Namesake, and really from inspiration to literally last week to execution, and thought that it would be interesting to spend a Friday of 4 Fridays of this month, to keep it with a small group and literally to hopefully inspire, but also particularly to demystify. The Namesake for me was entirely inspired by grief. I had lost somebody very close to me, and very unexpectedly. For me, the heart of the book is the loss of the parent. So I asked Suni whether she had read The Namesake. She said she had and loved it. And we didn't start talking about an adaptation right away because I was shooting. But when I came back to New York, which was just a week later, I sat with Jhumpa and I told her how I saw the film. The way I saw the film was to make a portrait of two cities as if they are one. Firstly, that is the state of being of a person who lives in many worlds, like I do. I wanted to take the template of the book, but take it to another dimension, is the love story. What happened was in March, we began to talk of this adaptation, and Cannes, as you know, is in May. Can we actually cook up a screenplay really quickly, with the book as we had it, to raise money 2 months later in May? We decided that it would be better not to take this to Cannes, And instead, I wrote a director's statement, which I actually just want to read here. After 2 years of working on an epic like Vanity Fair, I want to return to making a small-scale, intimate and mobile film, one which is extraordinarily close to my own reality as a South Asian person living in America today. I want to make this classic poignant story with hot, meditative strokes, capturing the gothic bustle of old Bengal against the pulsating new look of the young, cool Desi power in New York City. Obviously, key first to have a script that can sustain your budget, you know, that is what really the script you want to tell them, and secondly that they can see you know, the commerciality or lack of in that script.
There are three types of companies that you traditionally go to for financing. One is sort of the one we all know, which is sort of the studios and the distributors, that, you know, whether it's the Universal on the big level or the Focus Features on the niche level, who will do it all in, soup to nuts. Then you have foreign sales companies who oftentimes will advance financing for films, and they hold the foreign rights, and then you decide, you know, sometimes they hold North America as well, or you make those decisions. And then there are equity companies, companies who have funds, who put equity financing into films, and there are no rights, you know, necessarily assigned at that point. What has happened more and more in the last few years is that even the studios and the niche divisions are interested in equity partners to offset the risk of film. So it becomes a marketplace where you can be very creative about the financing, and it gives you more possibilities in that sort of the sculpting of the deal. Once you start to partner, you usually have a bond, because when there are partners involved, no one company wants to be on the hook for overages, because everybody has to agree, and who wants to be bothered with that? So let's have a bond company who's responsible. It's worth the money that you pay them. In our case, we paid the bond company $200,000. It was worth it to the investors to not have the headache of dealing with overages, to have the bond company deal with it. We settled on a number of 9.6 and decided we would try to split it 3 ways. So we got the Indian investor to come to 3.2. We got Fox Searchlight to say they would come in at 3.2 equity, but they'd be interested in distributing worldwide. That was interesting to us because we thought, you know, they have had an amazing success with the kind of film that we wanted to make, and nothing like it to know that they could be the distributor, you know, from the outset.
I felt with the namesake that I needed an Indian investor who was invested in it from the beginning, so that I would have somebody homegrown who would then exploit this film, you know, even though it's not going to be made like a Bollywood film or like a commercial Indian film in any way, but I want somebody on the turf there who knows the systems and who can be invested enough in it to give me a really substantial distribution.
The one thing you want to make sure is that if you are getting into business with a financier that is going to have some degree of influence and control over the destiny of the movie, you want to make sure you're making the same movie, because it is just, you know, it's just the beginning of the end if there's a controlling factor that's on a different page. And ultimately, you know, I mean, ultimately distributors can shelve pictures, drop them. There's no, you know, there's no good into that. So it's really important to, you know, have that, you know, have that creative connection, and that, you know, that you know, simpatico connection on the vision.
Did you know for sure, like before you start shooting, that you would have the final cut?
I was setting it out as that idea, you know, because I do have, in the films I produce and we produce together and that we cook up, I have final cut, you know, so I never questioned that it would be anything different, especially in this very personal film I was making. So, but, you know, Lydia will tell you that if the budget goes much higher than things, and if you have to go to a studio, depending on the financing nature of the game, people can definitely negotiate that and say, you can't get final cut if I'm giving you X amount of $1 million, you know?
I don't know if it is interesting to tell you what the breakdown is, but it's $2 million above the line, and then the production period itself was 5.9, which included about 800,000 spent in India. The post-production is with the other cost comes in at $1 million, and we had a contingency of about 700,000 and a bond of 200,000. And the contingency, we spent roughly half of it in the production period and the rest of it in the post-production period. In the production period, it was pretty much all used for crew overtime and a few extra days that we wanted to have.
I received a letter, a very passionate letter from Cal Penn, saying that I just, I'm an actor because I saw Mississippi Masala when I was 8 years old. I buy the namesake for everyone I love, and my show name when I check into hotels is Gogol Ganguly. Therefore, I must fly in and see you. And I wrote back to say, the role had been cast, but come anyway if you like. And he came, and he really blew me away.
Ma! You don't have time for one cup of tea? Her parents came to bother.
All right, look. Let's say I take her out to tea. Okay, what would I talk to her about? As far as I recall, she didn't speak.
Firstly, he was the genuine article. He was the authentic American Indian boy, and he just identified so closely with this character. He's also very funny, and he was keen to play dramatic role.
I've always enjoyed, and Mira said it once, sort of being a third eye who can kind of be in the fray when somebody needs to be in the fray, but also be able to step back from the fray and have a perspective on the bigger picture and be able to, come in and sort of be able to bounce ideas off and suggest and anticipate in ways that sometimes everybody who's in the fray doesn't have the time and the space to anticipate. What I do that I love, and to be able to sort of integrate, being involved and having it all come together from the beginning to the end is where I find, my heart the fullest.
You and Mr. Alps decided to talk about the different looks you were going to have in the film, like when Maxine comes out of the bedroom and they had just broken up, or when they're on the beach on the rocks. And I don't know if you're using different film stock or if it's different post-processes. And like Calcutta, like how you guys talked about color prior, you're going to shoot that.
We came upon this technique of the bleach bypass, which a lot of this is. It's a kind of a higher contrast, less color, kind of harsher feeling as something that we liked, and it would look good both in New York City and in Calcutta. And where to use it and how to figure it out was the next key, because we didn't really want the flashbacks to be in a particular way, because this film does travel in time a little bit. We wanted to make it bigger than that, or somehow more overreaching than that. We tried in the end to kind of tie it to emotional moments in the film, so that there's a memory moment that's emotional in the boys. Well, in all three, the boy and his parents, when they're out on the jetty, and that scene is kind of a touchstone and a scene that we come back to a couple times. And we decided that manipulating that and making that have this feeling was really appropriate, since we knew kind of where it was going to come in the story and how often. So we committed to shoot that only in that process. It's no other way. The same with a lot of the train wreck. We knew we wanted it to be impressionistic at least some of the time in his telling of the story. And we knew we'd come back to it a couple times in the film. So we actually shot that both ways. We shot that as normal photography and as bleach bypass, so we could have it both ways.
It was not so simple as the past would be in black and white or this or that treatment. In fact, that's why Calcutta is vibrant in the past sometimes, and then when you're looking at Ashok's recovery in the room, for instance, when he's looking at the bridge, it's almost black and white, because it is it's almost a harshness that we went for. Early on, when I was trying to entice and seduce Fred to join me in this, and we didn't know each other that well, I was in Calcutta, and I remember phoning him in New York and talking to him about how I wanted the two cities, Calcutta and New York, to be treated almost like one, and these different looks that I didn't yet put my finger on how we would achieve them. That was for him to help me do. That the film is about movement. It's about planes and suitcases and buses and trams and everything that we as not just as immigrants, but as people in the world now, we're always on the move. So laced in with this Calcutta, New York, part of this whole thing, and also part of the idea of transitions, because the idea of transitions in this film is obviously key. You know, how do you do 25, 30 years without doing it didactically, by doing it cinematically, you know. So that was a big, both a challenge and a real excitement in this film for me, is to get that, how do you visually, you know, make a big transition. So for a filmmaker, literally everything has to be chosen. You know, you have to choose, and you have to be mindful and aware of every single thing. So it's about, I think, taking enormous enjoyment in really reaping every moment to serve your larger purpose. And it was such an opportunity when Fred said he would do this film to also explore a new terrain for me. This film really came out of a huge influence of the photographic. Photography is a huge fuel for me, but it did come from this, you know, what I call the democratic frame, where it's the wide frame and the actors move in it.
When you look at this film and you see the juxtaposition of colors or the juxtaposition of cities, you know, that really comes from Mira as the driving force, you know, through Stephanie the designer and through me as the photographer. But it's her idea, you know, it starts there.
I was wondering if you could talk about the color timing of the film and the choices you made in the color timing room after you'd come up with a visual kind of shooting strategy.
It's really the opportunity to see it all through, to kind of get the details right. And once you're past the sort of niggling little technical business of making each scene match within itself, then you can sit back and luckily at that moment we had the final track was finished just about the same day, so we could see the first print with sound. Then when you sit back with sound, you can say, oh, whoa, look at that, you know, I never even imagined, you know, what that would mean in the context of the track. So you sit back and take it at a whole new level and say, well, this scene, you know, really is about, you know, about the music, and the image should sit back a little bit and not be so prominent. Or vice versa. There is no music, there's nothing else happening here. There's a moment of silence and the image becomes more powerful. When you start to see the build-up to Ashok's death, I tried to, you know, to draw out the house as a little warmer place where she was, though lonely, and when he's in the phone booth in the hospital, to make the fluorescence just a little more garish and a little more pale, just to make them feel that much more separate.
Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration in shot listing?
I had these wonderful pictures of Fred playing Ashima and me playing Ashok.
You know, part of what we did, fortunately, was you know, spend a day on the weekend and go to the location that we were going to shoot in the following Monday and talk through where the scenes were and what we imagined the actors to be doing.
Many scenes were conceived like that, you know, like we are faithful to one image that we'll get really beautifully, you know, rather than a whole bunch of stuff that, you know, we might use. I almost never work like that.
There wasn't really a lot of extra coverage. It really wasn't, and there wasn't time to do it. I mean, sometimes it does come down to that, you know, it's the end of the day and we have to do this last scene and get out, and it was always conceived as one shot, but gee, it would be nice to have a close-up as well.
We couldn't afford to do everything in New York, so we filmed a few New York scenes in Calcutta. One scene that we did in Calcutta was the honeymoon, that sort of goofy dance, you know, that Moshami and Gogol do, that we took that amazing wallpaper of those red roses. That was my hotel room, in fact, and we, you know, made that the hotel, you know, like a high kitsch honeymoon motel here, you know. So that's one scene that we filmed in Calcutta, and the other scene we filmed in Calcutta was Moshami. Yeah, was their apartment. When Gogol comes for a date and she cooks and they kiss for the first time and make love. That was in Calcutta. Those are the things you have to do. You know, it's much greater bang for your buck in India than here. One of the first things I asked Jhumpa to do was to invite me home to her family, and I photographed their house and also photographed their photograph album. A lot of the fashion, a lot of the kind of ideas of what the parents will wear and so on would emerge from these pictures. This is that look of that very classic Bengali intellectual, the thick glasses, the big hair. An Indian would recognize that a mile away. Steph, do you want to say anything at this point? Yeah.
Very easy to find the house.
Yeah.
I mean, you've talked about all the restrictions, budget-wise and time-wise, and how few days we had to accomplish 30-year change in the script.
Yeah.
But we found a house that was quite perfect for the Eggleston look that we wanted. What we did is basically took it over because they were going to renovate it anyway, so we had freedom to do whatever we wanted, and we didn't have to put it back in the kitchen also. So I have some pictures you can look at later with palette ideas of how different, how we changed it. Even added some walls and
the important thing was depth of field, you know, like not to have a series of little rooms. And the idea for me was, you know, always to split the frame, half the image and half him. You know, always this sense of things. And to do that in this way, you need a depth of field. You need to be back there and have a certain kind of lens. You need that length, you know. If you were in a little place, you couldn't have this shot. The idea of a phone booth, again, was to have, again, half the frame have life around it and tell you where we are without showing some lousy establishing shot, you know.
I think that's the best part of the job, investigating new artists, new photographers particularly, and getting to use their work when it inspires the design. This is what I call a Bible of all of the colors, the wallpapers, what was used finally in the film from that original palette that was composed. You just want to see that. And
the palette, you must also say, it was used, all this palette was used in the screen testing with the with the actors in their costumes. And then with the DP, when we do the actual screen testing, how the decisions then really get made at that point, because things have to fall away and change. Fred, after a while, had this unbelievable idea which changed the nature of the shoot of the aftermath. So then we were looking at the whole thing, and he said, why not we take the train that we had just shot in the studio and put it in as a forward plane, see through it, and then come past it to reveal the whole metal sculptor yard, the whole aftermath here. You see, so that gave me that depth, that gave me, it gave me so much drama, so much more drama. And then we revealed the big shot.
How's your relationship with the DP once the shot has been established?
It's always ongoing. You mean, how often do we communicate?
How is the dialogue?
We have to communicate about lighting sources, lighting fixtures. He needs to know, he needs to check all of them before they're put on. He'd like to, or his gaffer, not Fred, but his gaffer checks them all before they go on. I show him any color, any changes in colors.
Sometimes Stephanie is there, if she can afford the time, when we're shooting that location, that set for the first time. And she's there just to see what I'm doing, make sure that I'm not forgetting certain things that she could do, you know. And sometimes I want her there because, for the first time, I'm in a set, because then I have another pair of eyes to help me on a new set while I'm doing a zillion other things at the same time. But as soon as we set up that first set, then you're off, because you're always on to the next set.
When we were casting, there were all of these pujas going on, all of these festivals were going on, and it was huge, huge resource for me, because I got invited to go, and I would just sit there, and there would be hundreds of Bengalis there, you know, having food and dinner, and, you know, and they would see me, and then they would ask me what I was doing, and I would say I was casting a film for Mir Nair, and they're like, you know, their eyes would light up, and I said, well, would you mind if I would take a Polaroid of you and your family, and you would get their phone numbers, and then I would show Mira the pictures, and she would say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, based on look for smaller parts, and then I would bring them all in, audition them, and then we would cast a lot of the supporting roles.
And then a lot of it was also the main extras. We wanted to make it like one community. Like, you know, how it is at the end of the film, she says, I will miss you, my family. You know, the constructed family that becomes your family in an immigrant situation. And all of those people I really wanted to be Jhumpa Lahiri's family, because they were great looking, they were all varied. Even the family that she wrote about, not just her mother and father, actual relatives, but the extended family that had become her family from those images. And when I went and spent the weekend with her family, they all came, all these aunties and uncles, just to meet me and so on. And I really loved the variety of that look and the clothing and all of that. So we cast them all as the major community, as the community you always see in the parties situation.
The parties and the funeral.
Yeah.
All of these women are choosing to be with Gogol. There has to be something about them that makes them interesting, or otherwise wouldn't Maxine be with the guy from Wall Street? I mean, you know, or if we're just getting into stereotypes, you know, there has to be some quality of all these people. If you're watching them for that amount of time, there has to be something that's likable about all of them.
And yet, not just likable in a boring kind of way, but likable and yet the selfishness, the self-centeredness, the indulgence, the wealth, the, you know, that the prep school smacking of privilege quality that I can tell like that.
Was there pressure for you to cast a Bachchan because...
No pressure from the money, just pressure internally, you know, like hoping I can reach my some kind of an Indian audience, you know. And I knew I had reached an Indian audience in a huge way with Monsoon Wedding, and also, funnily enough, with Salaam Bombay, which was not expected to have an Indian audience in some way. My movies are what they are, you know. And then you're saying that, okay, now I'm in this place, so can I cast somebody who means something in some place? You know, to help me that much, because otherwise it's a big load to carry. And I've carried it almost in every film, because I'm always working with either a non-star or, you know, it's hard. And when I have stars in my Western kind of films, it's just like a piece of cake, because, you know, I don't have to do the publicity all myself. I have a great time because I can tune the performance. I have much more of a budget. There's so many attributes, you know. Because of these stars, namesake casting was in the papers every day in India, wherever you were, for months, because now Abhishek was in, now he was out, then Pankuna was in, then he was out, then so they were, it was like a tabloid item, who was going to be who, you know. And so Tabu just, you know, went for it. And then, you know, we are in it, and I'm just thanking my stars because of the gravitas, the age, and so on. Casting is the whole, you know, always the whole, and always the balance, and always ensemble. My films are almost always ensemble. So, and that's where, you know, Cindy comes in so critically for me, because that perspective, you know, I get a perspective that you have that I can lose, you know, which is very key to listen to, because entire movies can be destroyed by wrong casting. You basically have to get what you want any which way, you know, whether it's a star or as a non-actor, because that's your responsibility as a director. And some people it's easier and you know how to do, you know, and some people they'll resist you, but you just have to find that way, because you can't not find that way. You can't be, you have to get that way, you know, because you really don't have it otherwise. Today we have the benefit and privilege of Alison Johnson, my wonderful editor, who cut also Monsoon Wedding and Vanity Fair and basically everything I've made in the last 5-6 years. It was a big decision whether to start with the accident. And as you saw in the shooting script, we started with the whole reveal, you know. And that decision even to start with the accident took a long time in the script adaptation, you know. But similarly, in the my memory was that the first cut we definitely stayed right until after the accident. We went into the aftermath directly, and then ended on the close-up of his hand holding the paper that said Gogol. And then from Gogol, the close-up of Gogol, it went into the title of the namesake. So you understood so directly that it was Gogol that was the namesake. But then we lived with it, and what happened was it was, took too long to start the story.
The other challenge, I think, with something like this, working with the music, is we're obviously working with a temp score. It's difficult to, you know, kind of takes away from the whole piece when the music isn't working, you know, absolutely perfectly. When you are planning to have some sort of singing in it, or a particular piece of music, say, that everybody's going to dance to, you need to really shoot it at the time.
We were striving to find a voice that would suit Tabu's voice, you know, and we started with one person, and it didn't fit her voice. So then I thought of another person who happened to live in New Jersey, and she was flown from New Jersey to London, and then they did 3 recordings, and then they sent it to me in Calcutta, and I chose one, and by the time choosing one and giving it to Tabu, it was probably the night before shooting. The title sequence, to have the first part of the title sequence, just all the money, you know, so-and-so present, so-and-so present, so-and-so present, and then go into the, so that you're more prepared for the trunk, you know. And then when the crash happens, then the rest of the titles of the cast and so on. And also it doesn't feel so extended.
At what point did you discuss with your editor how to deal with transitions, and it must have been quite early in the process?
Yeah, in some cases that we knew, where we knew how to do it from the beginning of opening New York, America, with her extreme close-up of her eye, you know. So that was all very, and I think when you go for that kind of radical, not so radical, but for me it was like that radical smash close-up into a certain thing that you have from the beginning, there's a real energy in it, you know. And there's a kind of confidence in it, you know, where you don't have to reveal the whole world, you know. So this was a thought through before. There was never any change in this.
With transitions, I think the big thing was the traffic and the cityscapes actually were helping us quite a bit, because we had to go also back and forth from India to New York. Whatever film ends up being made, which is never exactly the film that you begin with, that kind of dictates what you're going to do. So you may have thought a certain transition was going to be there, and something else just comes out of what you've created. You know, you've cut some scenes out, and now you have all of this footage that doesn't necessarily have to be a complete scene. It can just be images that make up a transition instead.
10 weeks to director's cut.
Yeah, and then we fiddled around after that,
yeah,
back and forth, back and forth.
But it was pretty quick, this one.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, I think we took 6 weeks to come to the directors, to sort of come to a firm structure that we loved, you know, that we thought was working. And then it was finessing from that point on, right? About 4 weeks more.
Yeah. How does that process work? Like, do you come up with an assembly and then you discuss it then, and then, like, how did the process work?
Well, while Mira's shooting, I'm basically in the edit room just trying to get the scenes roughly cut together so that she knows that she has everything, because it would be horrible for, you know, for me to be a couple of days late and then all of a sudden they've left the location, certain actors have gone, and we need something to actually make the scene work. So part of the shooting process for me is just trying to keep up so that, you know, Mira knows that she has everything, so she can be comfortable knowing that she has everything. In the first cut, you really need to just see everything that you have. Even if you are sure that it's going to come out and it's not going to be in the final, you just really need to know the big picture so that you can just slowly remove the things that are unnecessary. And you also know, oh, okay, it won't work here, but maybe we can use it somewhere else.
How do you work with the music? Do you cut and then the music is scored to the cut, or do you cut to a score that you like? I mean, which way does it work mostly?
Mira's very involved in the choosing of the music, and so she picks temp music, things that have the right feel for the scene. And I usually end up having to cut the pieces up a little bit and, you know, cut uninteresting parts out. Once I've cut the music for the scene, it all comes together. It's kind of like you can't just cut the music and then cut the scene on top of it, and you can't cut the scene and then just lay the music on top of it. It's got to happen simultaneously, which is why I prefer doing it myself in the beginning stages, because otherwise I have to keep handing the music over to somebody else and saying, no, we need more here, less there, you know. Whereas if I just maybe put a few more frames on the picture, then the music will work.
What's helpful for me from viewing the assembly is that it's got everything there is, you know, which is also very unnerving for me, because it can fall apart, like say those scenes where the big scenes, the party scenes. It's like giving me everything, because she has to do that, you know, but I don't want to see all these people doing all, I don't want to show the, you know, it's like that's not the scene is like different. It's about the little baby Sonia, you know, whatever. So for me, it's like, oh God, I really didn't do well, you know, myself, you know, when I see everything about a scene. And obviously it's culling that, and especially those big scenes, you know, because you have to cover them in all these traditional ways. And I really hate that, you know. It's very hard to do those scenes in a sculpted way from the beginning because you have too many elements in them. So you have to do it in the traditional way. And so she does show it in the cutting, the whole caboodle, you know, and you don't want that. Say, I don't want that, you know. So it is different.
And then I'm relieved when she says, I don't want all of that.
Get it all out. Yeah. I think that the film becomes much more universal this way, you know, the way we've cut it. Because it gives you just that moment. It doesn't get you involved in the anthropology of it. Okay, now she's going to tie her sari, and you know, we have to put red tikka because we are married in the morning. All that I don't get into, you know. I don't know if this is the key, I'm not sure. But it also just cuts to the chase and treats the people in the film like anybody, you know, anywhere, rather than being precious or special. So listen, guys, I can't believe it. This is the end of this encounter, but thank you very much. And we'll meet again.